Good morning and thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching Trade Talk on BQ Prime. My name is Alex Matthew. We're setting up for what will be a very action-packed day in the Indian equity markets and indeed markets in general, because the RBI Monetary Policy Committee's decision on rates and on policy in general is going to be out in just a short while. 10 a.m. to be exact. And we're expecting that it is going to be a cautious start to trade in the Indian equity markets. Indeed, global markets as well are trading with caution because there is a very crucial piece of data that is expected to come out later this evening in the US, and that relates to jobs. There has been contradictory information, if you can call it that, through the week. And traders and investors are trying to gauge what really the scene is with regard to the job situation, because that could have a bearing on what the Fed does in its November policy. But turning attention back to India, in trade yesterday, you saw the benchmark indices snap a two-day losing streak. You had the Nifty 50 gain about 0.5% or thereabouts. And IT was really the sector to watch because there was quite a bit of buying. The IT index as a whole gained about 1% or so. On the flip side, you had quite a bit of volatility for the banks. And though you saw buying in some select pockets, you saw the Nifty PSU bank that lost ground eventually in trade. And it was quite the peaks and troughs that you saw in that index. And indeed, in individual names, something like a PNB was the one that lost the most ground in trade yesterday. But let's turn attention now to what could happen today. And indeed, banks could very well be in focus, and the Nifty bank levels will be very keenly watched. Agam is joining in to give you some perspective on what is happening in the F&O space so that we can kind of gauge where these indices are heading. Morning, Agam. What are you picking up?
Well, morning, Alex. But I reckon to a certain extent, the pause on rates is kind of being factored in as far as your benchmarks go. Exactly how we've seen a bit of covering as far as the benchmarks are concerned yesterday. The Nifty saw fresh longs with an addition in open interest. The Bank Nifty saw short covering with a decline in open interest, with both the indices moving higher. At the moment, the markets are not worried about interest rates. Well, the expectation is that it will be a pause. And as far as the levels that we are watching out for, do remember that we're going into the new week in terms of the weekly options expiries. So coming down to the Nifty, watching out for around the 19,600 mark. That's going to be crucial. A day before, we saw the Nifty make an intraday low of around the mark of 19,300, 19,350. That should provide for a near-term support. And, in terms of the most active options too, it is essentially around 19,500, 19,400 is where we're seeing most amount of activity coming through. Coming down to the Bank Nifty too, and of course, this time the expiry will be sooner than the Nifty. The Bank Nifty is also seeing a lot of traction on the lower end around the 44,000 mark, and on the higher end, we're starting to see more traction build around the 44,400, 44,300, and 44,200 calls thereabouts. But for now, Alex, it seems, at least in today's day of trade, we're expecting consolidation to come through. And the question is where markets want to take these indices once we have the monetary policy, but more importantly, the RBI governor's commentary coming through, which will be more crucial.
Certainly. Speaking of that commentary, Agam, let's take a check on where things stand, because there are question marks in terms of the spatial distribution of the monsoon,
right,
the implications of crude oil prices, which have been elevated and that have cooled off, of course, over the last couple of days. But clearly the MPC has a lot to talk about. And let's set the context for you. We've got Pallavi Nahata, who has this report on everything that you need to know ahead of the Monetary Policy Committee's outcome.
All economists polled by Bloomberg expect the MPC to continue to maintain a status quo on the benchmark repo rate that's currently at 6.5%. That does not mean it's going to be a boring policy. Let's have a look at what's changed since the last policy. Starting with inflation. Retail inflation has eased but remains elevated at 6.8% in August. It's expected to decline further in September, led by a steep correction in vegetable prices. According to Rahul Bajoria, chief economist at Barclays, inflation in the July-September quarter is likely to be a little over the 6.2% the RBI projects. Also, the impact of erratic southwest monsoons remains to be seen and could have some impact on inflation. What's also changed is crude oil prices. Since the last policy, that's averaged $89 per barrel, higher than $85 per barrel factored into the RBI's estimates. Now, while the impact on inflation is contingent on oil marketing companies passing costs to retailers, the impact on external sector is modest so far. What's also changed is tighter liquidity conditions despite the gradual unwinding of the incremental cash reserve ratio.
All right, so a hawkish pause is what is likely on the cards for the MPC's meeting outcome today. But let's focus in on a few stocks that will be in action in trade today. The State Bank of India, of course, is one of the most exciting stories that we have to talk about this morning, because there has been something in the works in terms of Chairman Dinesh Khara, and that has in fact come to pass. We've got Pragati joining in to give you some perspective on that. Pragati, we were wondering about the extension, if at all, for Dinesh Khara, because his term was set to get over today, and we didn't get too much clarity. We got clarity yesterday. What do you have for us?
Thanks, Alex, for that. Once again, as you rightly mentioned, that Mr. Khara's term had to end this morning. But what exactly has happened is a government notification has announced the extension of the term of Mr. Khara for a period of 10 months. So now Mr. Khara's term will end in August 2024. Along with Mr. Khara's term, the extension has also come into effect for the SBI MD, Mr. Ashwini Tiwari, and his term has been extended by 2 years. All these announcements were expected, as it was rightly mentioned that the government was mulling over the tenure extension of public sector bank chairmen and even the MDs of public sector banks.
Right. So, but what implications does that have for the rest of the heads of public sector banks?
We'll wait to see, because different notifications have to come out in terms of different banks, and we'll see what happens, because the government is yet to announce specifically for different chairmen and even the other heads.
All right, we'll come back to you for those updates. Thanks so much, Pragati, for bringing us those details. Sticking with news on the financial space then, Bajaj Finance is going to be a stock to watch today, because again, there was some buzz about fundraising in this particular company, and that has in fact been approved by the board. Himansh is joining in to give you all of the details there. Himansh, quite a considerable amount of money being raised, or the approval has come in to be raised. What can you tell us about that?
Right, Alex, like you rightly said, it's a significant amount. In fact, it's on the higher end of what analysts also expected. The amount to be around 10 to 15% of Bajaj Finance's quarter-one net worth. Well, the board has approved an aggregate fundraise of 10,000 crores, of which 8,800 are earmarked to be raised via a QIP, and 1,200 crores are going to be raised through a preferential issue of 15.5 lakh share warrants. Now, the fundraise is yet set to be approved by the shareholders at the EGM, and as I mentioned before, that this fundraise is on the upper end of the analyst expectations, which were hovering around 10 to 15% of the net worth. And the lender, the fact is that it already has a tier 1 capital ratio of 23%, which is very well capitalized. So why are they raising funds now? Well, some expect that they're raising funds in light of these benign market conditions where primary markets are on the up and up, and so are the secondary markets. Raising capital beforehand will allow them to invest in new businesses such as vehicle loans, gold loans, microfinance, and so on. And as a result of this fundraise, there would also be a stake dilution of about 2%, but the book value share is expected to go up as more equity capital is infused. And overall, the Bajaj Finance came in with its results also 3 days back, where their AUM growth of 33% was above what the management has guided between the 29 to 31% range. And the deposits have also shown growth of almost 40% year on year. So with the strong numbers posting and with this capital raise as well, the prospects look good. And let's see how brokerages and analysts also revise their views and outlook for the lender.
Certainly. And we'll, of course, get more details on those numbers that were released in the quarterly updates when the results come out in the coming weeks. Thank you so much, Himansh, for bringing us those updates. Now, there has been an update on Tata Motors as well with respect to its UK subsidiary, Jaguar Land Rover. And remember, this is an entity that contributes quite a large amount to the consolidated top line as well as the bottom line in the past for Tata Motors. And of course, a lot of the attention in recent past has been on the standalone entity. But nonetheless, Jaguar Land Rover has said that it had its retail sales grow as much as 21% year on year to over 1 lakh of units. And it has also said that its order book currently stands at 1.68 lakh units. And what is most important in that quarterly update that it gave yesterday, post-market hours, is the fact that it expects to return to positive free cash flow, and it's expecting a number of 300 million pounds sterling in the second quarter. And that is certainly going to have a bearing on the stock price in Tata Motors today. Of course, this was to a certain extent expected, but that confirmation from the company is going to be seen in all probability in a positive light. We've got more updates to talk about, particularly in the pharma space. There are quite a few companies that will be in focus because of notifications that have been sent to the stock exchanges. Varsha is joining in to give you some perspective there. Morning, Varsha. Lots to talk about today.
So starting with Cipla. So now the inspection was conducted by the US FDA at the manufacturing facility of InvaGen Pharmaceuticals, which is the wholly owned subsidiary of the company in US. So the inspection was from 11 September to 19 September. Now on conclusion of the inspection, InvaGen had received 5 inspectional observation in form 483. Now BQ Prime had obtained a copy of the observation from the administrator, and the observations were that written procedures were not reviewed and approved by the quality control unit. Also, the labeling and packaging materials were not sampled and tested before use in labeling of a drug product, and the equipment and utensils were not cleaned at appropriate intervals to prevent contamination of drug product. And instances of the presence of unknown white material were noted on cleaned and ready to use sieve screen and tablets diced during walkthrough. Also, the responsibilities and procedures applicable to the quality control unit were not fully in writing and fully followed. Now, how this will impact on revenue of the company were the queries were not still answered. Then the next we have Sun Pharma, where the Sun Pharmaceutical Industries to acquire minority stake in eZerx Health Limited and Augusta Software Limited. Now, company will acquire 37.76% equity in eZerx for 28 crore and 4.04% in Augusta for rupees 4.5 crore. Now, eZerx engages in the production and marketing and distribution of non-invasive diagnostic and ancillary medical devices, while Augusta is into early stage digital diagnostic device company. Sun Pharma increased its investment in Augusta by 4.04% from the previous agreement to acquire 26.09%. So now drug maker will own almost 30% of the company after this acquisition. Next, we have Lupin, where the company has received tentative approval from US FDA for tolvaptan tablets, which is used to treat low levels of sodium in the blood. And this product will be manufactured in its Nagpur facility. And also the tablets has an estimated annual sales of around $287 million in US. Then we have Mankind Pharma, where the company faced disruptions at its Sikkim facility due to disturbance in power supply because of flash floods in River Teesta. But there's no major disruption expected in supply chain, as the manufacturing of the products have been diverted to other plants. Then lastly, we have a chemical company, Lakshmi Organics Industries, where the board is considering a QIP for which it approved floor price of rupees 283.2 cents per share. Now, the company has planned a capex of 710 crore. So, for this, maybe the QIP has been approved. Now, let's see what happens, because the company is entering into fluorochemicals, which is the hot topic of chemical industry.
Certainly. Thanks so much for bringing us those updates, Varsha. Now, the pharma pack as a whole was under a little bit of pressure yesterday, and indeed, a couple of names that was talked about today, Cipla in particular, might just face a little bit of selling in trade today. Of course, it's a stock that has been in the news for a lot of reasons, and we'll have to see how that reaction plays out today. But let's focus on the rest of the stocks that are likely to see action on the basis of news updates, and Saloni is joining in with her list of stocks. Morning, Saloni. What do you have for us?
Morning. So we've had two companies that have posted their quarterly results yesterday in addition to Tata
The
Motors.
updates.
Quarterly updates. So first we have Adani Wilmar that delivered strong volume growth in double digits on the back of large opportunity in packaged staple food and strong execution. Rural sales have been growing at a faster rate due to higher focus on increasing the rural distribution network. And while this volume growth was strong, the sales value decline on a year-on-year basis is reflective of the sharp fall in global edible oil prices. The food and FMCG business continued to grow rapidly, and this is despite the decline in exports revenue due to restrictions on rice exports. So the profitability of the quarter remained under stress due to divergent trends in the spot and future prices of edible oils. And the local edible oil prices were also under pressure due to excessive imports by the industry in the recent months. The second one is Godrej Consumer. So the company's organic business delivered steady performance with mid-single digit volume growth, and overall the home care volumes grew in mid-single digit while the personal care grew in low single digit. The company's Indonesia business continued to deliver improving performance with double-digit volume and value growth. And Godrej Africa, USA, and Middle East continued its consistent performance with constant currency sales growing in mid-teens. And however, in the INR terms, the adverse currency translation impact will result in mid-single digit sales decline. So the company expects sales growth to be in mid-single digit in INR terms, and it continues to drive healthy year-on-year expansion in EBITDA margins across key markets with higher category development investments. And also another stock that we need to watch out for today is Valiant Laboratories, which is listing on stock exchanges. So the company had initially launched its IPO on September 27th, which closed on October 3rd. So the company's IPO had comprised a fresh issue of 1 odd crore shares that amounted to a total issue size of 152 odd crores. The IPO was subscribed to 29.76 times on its final day, which was led by non-institutional investors. So the shares of the company are debuting on stock exchanges today at an issue price of 140 apiece.
All right, Valiant is the last one to watch out for. Thanks so much, Saloni, for bringing us those updates. 140 is the number that you have to watch out for. And depending on how things go, you could see, an interesting debut. In the recent past, you've had quite a few stocks make the stellar debuts. So we'll have to see whether Valiant joins that list. Of course, at that same time, you're going to have the Monetary Policy Committee announce its results as well, or rather, it's the outcome of its meeting. Mika is joining in now with her list of stocks, and this is the last list of stocks for this morning. Morning, Mihika.
Morning. So first we have Tata Communication. It's completed its acquisition of Kalera Incorporation. The company entered into a definite agreement with the company on June 28, and under the terms of agreement, Tata Communication paid an aggregate consideration of $100 million in cash. Shares were acquired for $7.25 per share, and Kalera and its subsidiaries have now become a wholly owned subsidiary of Tata Communication. The company believes that Kalera's expertise in technology, engineering, and research will help drive growth of global enterprises through highly personalized and intelligent customer interactions. Next, we have Larsen & Toubro. The Ministry of Economy of the Republic of Azerbaijan has approved the company's voluntary liquidation of joint venture named L&T Hydrocarbon Caspian, and the company now ceases to be a joint venture with the Azerbaijan government. Then we have Bharat Heavy Electricals, which has received 2 awards in arbitration proceedings against Jai Prakash Power Ventures in 2 separate cases. The first case is related to an ESP contract for 2 660 megawatt JP Nigri super thermal power project, and the second case is related to a BTG contract for a 2 into 250 megawatt Bina thermal power plant. Then we have SPJN. The President of India, acting through the Ministry of Power, the government of India is proposing to offer 181,000 equity shares of face value of rupees 10 each to the eligible employees of the company. This employee OFS will remain open from 10 a.m. October 6th to 5:30 p.m. October 10th. And lastly, we have KPI Energy, which received new orders aggregating to 12.10 megawatts for executing solar power projects, out of which 3.10 megawatt capacity will be undertaken by the company and 9 megawatt capacity by Sundrops Energia, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the company itself under the captive
captive power producer segment of the company. The new orders were received from 5 different entities and are scheduled to be completed in FY24 in various tranches according to the order terms.
All right, thanks, Megha, for those updates. Now, we've spoken about several stocks that are likely to see action today, but most importantly is the outcome of the Monetary Policy Committee's meeting. That will be live at 10 o'clock with the address of the Reserve Bank of India Governor. It will be followed, of course, by a press conference at 12 p.m. We'll bring you all of those events live. And after that, we'll bring you a panel of experts to dissect what has been announced in the policy today. So stay tuned for all of those and lots more coming up on BQ Prime.
The RBI Monetary Policy Committee has much to consider. Volatile crude oil prices and concerns about the spatial distribution of the monsoon. Will these have a bearing on the RBI's growth and inflation projections? And more importantly, will the status quo on rates be maintained? For all the news and analysis, tune in to the live coverage on BQ Prime.